Alrighty then. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Kate McKenzie. And I've known Kate for a number of years, and I haven't seen her since before COVID. So I'm so pleased that you're here to join us. Kate has more than 2 decades of work in food systems, specifically focused on food security and broader anti-poverty solutions in New York City and nationally. I get to say I knew her when she worked at City Harvest, and I'd like to think I was one of your early disciples in New York City before moving back upstate. And I'm just so pleased to see all of the really good work that you've been able to do at the New York City Mayor's Office of Food Policy. So Kate is the executive director of that office, which means that she advises the mayor on all issues related to food policy and the city's food system. As you might imagine, a lot of us in the coalition have been focused on COVID response. That's the same for Kate and her office. She led the city's interagency COVID response effort. And through that work, more than 230 million free meals, it's mind-boggling to even think about, but 230 million meals were provided to New Yorkers through that emergency response, which Kate and her office coordinated. She's also led the city's good food purchasing commitments to increase access to healthy, sustainable foods for more than 238 million meals and snacks served daily by city agencies, whether public schools or senior centers. And I did not know this, Kate, until I was reading your bio, but the city agencies actually recognize Meatless Mondays, which is pretty cool. And so what we're going to hear about today is the 10-year food policy plan called Food Forward NYC, which is the city's first ever 10-year food policy plan, which lays out a comprehensive framework to reach a more equitable, sustainable, and healthy food system by 2031. So you heard the mission of the Hudson Valley Food Systems Coalition, and it's very closely aligned with the goals and aspirations of that food policy plan. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kate so she can offer her presentation, and then we'll leave a little time for some questions and discussion at the end.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It's great to be here and see some names and faces that that I know and recognize, and thank you for this opportunity. Also want to appreciate some of my colleagues who are on the call, Jeffrey, Carolyn, Matt, possibly a few others, and some of my staff who could not join, Delaney Bauman and Mandu Sen in particular. So I think Megan is going to share screen, and let me just change my view here. Oh, great. Okay. So we can go ahead to the next slide. As you all know, our food system, and New York City's food system in particular, is both influenced by and influencing the built and natural environment, as well as people's lives in countless ways. In Food Forward New York City, we address all the phases of the food supply chain, from production to processing to distribution to retail to consumption and post-consumption. Okay? But any discussion of the food system needs to start with the extraordinary food insecurity New Yorkers face. Even before the pandemic, food insecurity was incredibly high, at about 1.1 million New Yorkers. And when I say New Yorkers, I'm speaking of city residents. But today, we've worked with Feeding America to estimate that right now there are about 1.6 million food insecure New Yorkers. And we know that food insecure New Yorkers come from all over. They're school-aged kids, college students, seniors, and working adults. And while for very good reasons, we as policymakers have spent a lot of time focused on solutions such as food pantries and soup kitchens and the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. But however, we know that food insecure New Yorkers get their food in so many other ways. A Columbia study from 2018 and supported by the Robin Hood Foundation found that New Yorkers facing severe food hardship, of them, About only 1 in 4 use food pantries, and only 1 in 2 are enrolled in SNAP. So this is just one study, but I'm emphasizing it because when we think about food insecure New Yorkers, we really should think about helping them to get food where they are, in their local bodegas or grocery stores, on their way to work, thinking about prepared food as well as groceries. In the plan, we also place a big emphasis on food businesses and food workers. Food businesses in New York City are largely owned by people of color and employ people of color. Food is a traditional pathway for immigrants to build wealth in America. We have hundreds of thousands of food workers here in the city, and it's hard to provide a precise estimate because of the many undocumented workers as well as delivery workers categorized as independent contractors, but it's safe to say that it's over 400,000. We also have many food businesses. About 1 in 6 of those businesses in New York City is actually a food business. And they're overwhelmingly small businesses. More than 70% have fewer than 10 employees. So for context, the first much criticized small business assistance plan provided by the previous administration in DC defines small businesses as any business with fewer than 500 workers. As such, very few of our small businesses actually benefited from this assistance. And yet, as we've learned, these workers and businesses are essential, and food workers deserve good wages, fair working conditions, and career pathways. This plan assumes that supporting food workers and businesses is the pathway to not only a stronger food system, but also a more economically and racially equitable New York City. Our food system also has many environmental impacts. There are the carbon emissions from food production, the use of pesticides and runoff, but there are also impacts closer to home. Our food spends a lot of time sitting in refrigerated units, whether located in trucks, standing in traffic, or in distribution centers. The air pollution from these units and other elements of the food supply chain is disproportionately concentrated in communities such as Hunts Point that also suffer from a disproportionate burden of respiratory ailments. And if the human cost was not enough, the inefficiencies of our system impose costs on food businesses and the city overall, contributing to congestion and noise. The plan, therefore, for the first time in a city document, ties together these threads and offers a policy framework for the food system that looks at our local, regional, and in some ways, national food infrastructure through a lens of sustainability and resiliency. When we were developing this plan, we were very mindful that the implicit charge of a 10-year food policy plan was to reset food policy in New York City and provide a systems approach. We needed to move away from a program by program, agency by agency approach. Despite developing this plan during a pandemic and running several large emergency programs, we took engagement for the plan very seriously. We engaged with 300 individuals from all across the food sector, including food workers and business owners, experts in infrastructure and sustainability and nutrition, and people from all over the city representing different communities, and many people with experience thinking about economic democracy projects such as co-ops and land trusts. We also built on the existing expertise of the Mayor's Office of Food Policy and across a variety of city agencies that also touch food systems. We utilized community engagement lessons learned from the city's Take Care New York initiative and insights gained from the COVID-19 Task Force on Racial Inclusion and Equity. One question we heard a lot while working on the plan was, given that the food system is highly fragmented, privately owned, and depends on food coming from outside the city, the state, and in some cases the country, how can this plan even have an impact? Well, we know that the city has many levers for changing the food system. For example, we can shape how federal benefits, programs like SNAP and WIC, for example, are administered. We can use our status as one of the largest food purchasers in the country to reshape markets. The city's regulatory policies and investments in infrastructure can be leveraged to support the food sector. We can support minority and women-owned businesses. We can leverage the power of convening and partnerships and push for change in federal and state policy. Leveraging all of these tools together under a single strategic framework in partnership with the many players in the food system, including many of you, we can transform this food system. So this is just a very small snapshot of how the city government on its own has an extraordinary role to play. New York City has dozens of city agencies that engage in food. There are, of course, the agencies that directly provide food to New Yorkers, a total of $500 million a year, and the list here is not even comprehensive. Many additional agencies support the city's food supply, from the Department of Small Business Services to the Department of Environmental Protection. And by providing a systems approach, a unified framework, Food Forward represents a sea change in the Mayor's Office of Food Policy and the city's approach to food policy. The plan itself is organized along the following categories. We've got 5 top-line overarching goals and then specific strategies and actions. And as it's a very long-range policy plan, the types of actions in the plan vary quite greatly. Some actions we've already launched or are about to launch. Others require studies or planning efforts to determine an implementation study. Yet others are partnerships that we're interested in exploring or depend on the results of long-term federal or state advocacy. The first goal is that all New Yorkers have multiple ways to access healthy, affordable, and culturally appropriate food. We want to move away from the traditional focus on emergency food and emphasize that all New Yorkers, including food insecure New Yorkers, deserve choice, convenience, health, and affordability. Let me give you some highlights from this goal. Going forward, I'll be highlighting just a couple strategies from each goal, but I should stress that there are 71 actions in the plan, and I'm not going to spend the time reading through all of them with you. But we're reiterating in the plan our sustained focus on transforming the emergency food system. The work we're doing now is really revolutionizing that emergency food system, bringing more equity and efficiency, as well as improving the offerings, the actual food that's being distributed. We're also looking to launch a new food program imminently that starts addressing specific unmet needs revealed by the pandemic. The needs of people who cannot leave home, who are not eligible for SNAP for whatever reason, might still need food assistance. We also identified infrastructure as a major barrier and will continue to discuss it further under Goal 3. We want to find new ways to improve access to space and particularly cold storage in underserved communities to reduce cost and operational burden of fresh, high-quality food. We also want to study the viability of food hubs and expand public schools' access to cold storage, processing space, and preparation capacity. The next goal is that New York City's food economy drives economic opportunity and provides good jobs. The recent crisis really demonstrated the need to support both our food workers and our small food businesses. In fact, one of the most interesting things that emerged from our engagement was that supporting both small businesses and workers together was necessary. There was no antagonism, but a very deep spirit of collaboration. First and foremost, we want to strengthen the ways in which we protect food workers, improve their pay and benefits. Some key ways of doing this are strengthening the enforcement of worker rights within the city and leveraging city procurements to support food workers that serve New York City. We're interested in increasing supports for worker cooperatives. One thing I'm particularly excited about is exploring innovations such as portable benefits. We also want to sharpen our focus on supporting small food businesses by streamlining both regulations and enforcement and making it easier to operate in the city. This is a tough city to do business in, and we want to help that. We also want to explore ways we can assist food businesses and customers to reclaim their data. Another way to provide win-wins for both workers and businesses is to invest in worker training. That includes developing career pathways in the food sector, training around food and technology, as well as language training opportunities. Goal 3 is the supply chains that feed New York City are modern, efficient, and resilient. To be able to provide healthy, affordable food to New Yorkers and leverage the food sector as an engine of economic opportunity, we need more space and infrastructure within the city that is dedicated to food, and we need to strengthen our regional connections. Firstly, we want to strengthen the city's food infrastructure, including continuing to modernize Hunts Point, investing in neighborhood and borough distribution facilities. We'll be working very closely with the New York City Economic Development Corporation on this. We're also quite excited to explore ways in which zoning, a really powerful regulatory tool, if used right, can help us protect and expand available space for different types of food uses. Regionalism is core to every element of this plan. Sourcing locally not only reduces food miles, but improves accountability and strengthens connections between the city and the region it's located in. We're deeply engaged on improving regional coordination, including by increasing procurement of regional food, advocating for regional food infrastructure, and developing additional partnerships with regional actors. We also want to support increased urban food production, including removing regulatory barriers from urban agriculture and promoting innovation in technology and use of space. Goal 4 is that New York City's food is produced, distributed, and disposed of sustainably. As part of that, we will work to integrate sustainability and animal welfare into city food programs, including city food procurement, integrating sustainability criteria into commercial waste contracts, and increasing composting. We seek to reduce the environmental burden and carbon footprint of the food system by making the transportation and cold storage systems more efficient and increasing electrification. This ties directly to the space and infrastructure issues we mentioned in Goal 3. We see it as really important that we minimize the environmental impact of food distribution within the city. We'll also seek to promote community and business innovation around food and sustainability. One particular area of excitement that we feel is around what emerged as a strategy as part of our engagement is bolstering community-owned waste management initiatives. And finally, Goal 5 is about supporting the systems and the knowledge to implement this actual 10-year food plan. This is about collective capacity, not just of the Mayor's Office of Food Policy and not just the city, but the food world, the whole food world, to deliver this plan. Currently, few systems are in place, whether in city government or outside of it, that have the capacity and the knowledge to alone implement a comprehensive food policy. Some of the things we're looking to do include the developing of measures that capture multiple dimensions of food insecurity. If we have better data, we get better food policy. And of course, there are many other dimensions of the food system that we might want to explore. We are also committed to being really proactive in looking for ways to partner with non-governmental sectors to maximize community participation in food policy decision-making. In the longer term, we're interested in exploring the creation of a food justice fund. So I want to spend just a minute talking about good food purchasing. It's a major theme across the plan, and there are multiple recommendations related to it under every goal, frankly. For those of you not familiar with the program, it provides a methodology to quantify the impact of the food and institution purchases along 5 core values, no matter where across the country the food comes from or how complex the supply chain. Those values include local economies, nutrition, valued workforce, environmental sustainability, and animal welfare. And the city is working to implement the framework across several dimensions. First, whenever legally possible, we are working to include good food purchasing into city contracts. We are also working to create the governance to support the program, whether it's a legislative change or procurement centralization. We're working to invest in city government-owned food infrastructure, starting with a shared commercial kitchen for providers serving older New Yorkers. Finally, as mentioned before, we're embracing regionalism by strengthening our connections with the region and eventually our food sourcing. So we talked a lot about the what, but we all also are clearly interested in the how we're going to implement this plan. First, we're working with city agencies to identify near-term implementation priorities. We're looking to partner to develop funding sources for food programs. We also have to expand the offices, the capacity of the offices of the Mayor's Office of Food Policy and improve our data collection. We need to continuously partner with advocates to identify community engagement opportunities around food and, frankly, advocate for this plan's implementation. In 2023, we'll be releasing our first 2-year report, and then subsequently every 2 years we'll issue progress reports. And with that, having said that, so much is happening right now. We're working on, as I mentioned, that new food program to launch in the coming week or so, transforming the emergency food network, expanding the health department's Get the Good Stuff program, and we're very, very busy working on the implementation of good food purchasing. And we recently released all of our data and action plans and citywide strategy on our website at nyc.gov/GFP. And so with that, Sarah, let me turn it back to you. And I'm really happy to take any questions or talk with any of you about ideas that you have or see what direction you want to go.
Thanks, Kate, for that really wonderful overview. I recall the report was released some months ago, and so I imagine you've done this presentation a few times and it's seamless. So really good job at encapsulating everything. Before I turn it over to all of our attendees, I had a couple of conversations just to get the a couple of questions to get the conversation going. I was wondering if you could share with us what was the inspirational moment to kick off this whole effort? What was the main impetus that got it going?
Sure. So there's a few things. One, when I was interviewing for this position in the summer of 2019, I was actually in my sort of like pitch for me in this role was like, I think we should do a 10-year food policy. I think we really need to pull everything together. And then that resonated, obviously, but it was also bolstered by some legislation that the council passed in February of 2020 that called for the creation of this plan. So in knowing that was not only that was coming, but I wanted to start working on the plan in January of 2020. We, got a work plan together and thought we knew what direction it would take. And then a month later, actually about 10 weeks later, COVID hit. So everything radically, in some ways radically changed, in other ways nothing changed and things just were brought to the surface. So we had a looming deadline to create a plan, but also surely could have taken a pass. But these lessons that we learned throughout COVID were just so important and necessary that we felt we would miss an opportunity if we did not find another, few hours in the day to create this plan itself. So that's why we did it with the release of February of 2021 is we just couldn't afford to wait any longer to capitalize on the energy and the awareness that more and more people were making that the food system and food policy is not just our federal programs, but it's about our food workers, it's about our regional agricultural network, and sustainability as well.
Great, thank you. So as I mentioned at the outset, I'm one of the co-facilitators of the Hudson Valley Food Systems Coalition. And so this next question is really coming from that perspective. I noticed that you did a lot of engagement throughout the city and the region of stakeholders and agency partners. And I wonder if you could talk us through the process for gathering input from such a broad subset of folks.
Yeah. This is something that I believe people can never get right. You know, you can really do your absolute best and you can never get it exactly right. There will always be ways, and there should always be ways that you can do better. So of course we were in the pandemic, and I think we all never thought that everything would be completely virtual for so long. But I think the first step, the first step that we took was also, because this was a city plan, we needed to get as many city agencies and city staff vocal as possible. And I'll tell you, it was one of the most rewarding experiences for me. I think Matt and Carolyn can attest to this too. I mean, at one point we had more than 100, I think in the like appendix to Food Forward, there's more than 100 city staff that had very cogent and clear perspectives on the role of their specific agency in food policy. And you remember, Sarah, like that's just, it's so rewarding to know that that sort of bench does exist, even if people don't identify their day jobs as specifically working on food policy. But also because this does rely on other sectors too, we hosted a series of Zoom platforms. We identified sort of like key first experts, which I always struggle with, but because we were creating, again, a city plan and not necessarily a plan for execution in communities just yet, we tried to create a diverse range of experts to help test a lot of our assumptions and ideas around the goals and strategies that we had. And then we had an even larger series of meetings, a broader group to sort of like showcase those with community organizations in particular to say, did we get this right? What are we missing? So because of COVID, we couldn't do a lot of, like direct outreach, but we also capitalized on the work that, as I mentioned, our city did around two really big sort of policy frameworks, the Task Force for Racial Equity and Inclusion that included a very strong food focus, and then that Take Care New York. So there was a lot of documented input specifically about food-related sentiments and recommendations. And I'm also coming from before my government days. I'm always pained with talking to people about what they want or need without being really clear that you can deliver on that. And again, because this is such a far-reaching, 10-year perspective here, I wanted to sort of be especially mindful of that. So that's how we did the engagement process, but also really wanted to hold ourselves accountable to that goal number 5, which is sort of the commitment to ongoing engagement around the plan itself.
Thanks so much for that. And my last question is, what advice would you give those of us working in food systems up here in the Hudson Valley? Do you have any advice for folks who might be interested in pulling together a food policy plan for our region upstate?
Yeah, I mean, in the same spirit as sort of mentioned with the engagement, it will never be as complete as you want it to be, but that shouldn't be the reason for not stepping forward. Something that also, we're really clear about with this plan, and I said it on every opportunity I get, is it's not final. There are things that are going to happen that are not articulated in this plan. I think the broad goals, speak to the areas that we'd like to see advancements in. But, even since we started the roadshow of Food Forward, in the spring of last year, so many different opportunities have come to life with Build It Back, with federal funding that we never, imagined being possible. And so the realization of those things will, in some way, shape, or form, advance a number of strategies that are in this plan. So I think, having the humility to say, we know this doesn't encompass everything, and that's okay, and that's intentional too.
Great, thanks so much. Okay, we will turn it over to questions from everyone else. And I would ask that you use the raise hand function. So if you go down to reactions at the bottom right of your screen, there should be a little raise hand function there, and we'll call on you and unmute you. Or if you don't feel like asking a question that way, you can type it into the chat and we'll read it aloud for you. And I'll do my best to make sure I get everybody. So do we have any questions or comments? Comments are welcome as well. Megan Larmer.
Thanks, Sarah, and thank you so much, Kate. That's a really inspiring vision for the city and clearly produced out of a really committed and thoughtful process. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Unsurprisingly, I'm really interested in the focus that you've put on regional food production and the city's, really powerful role as a center of food sales and food commerce. So what I'm curious to hear is what the preliminary thinking is around the aggregation and distribution centers that you briefly referenced as one of the activities within the plan, and what sort of outreach you have done or maybe doing to the agricultural communities here. I work specifically with a lot of entrant farmers. I'm very interested in how those small scale entrant farmers can gain access to these markets in a way that is less burdensome than what has been just the traditional way of driving your van down into the city.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to take a first stab, and then I might ask my colleague Matt or Carolyn or Jeffrey if you want to chime in. Let's see. I think it was within the first 2 months of COVID, so April and May of 2020. Some colleagues of mine, Matt and Carolyn are two of them, joined together. I think initially it was called a quad state call. And this was just a sort of like, okay, people within the vicinity, how you doing? Like, how are we dealing even with like trucks crossing state lines to move food around? And that became not just a source of great sharing of real experiences happening in the minute, but then thinking again about the future after this crisis. And that's sort of morphed into a regional food working group call that together MOFP and city planning host about quarterly, maybe every 10 or 12 weeks. And the city is offering that sort of platform to help identify some of these solutions, solutions, ideas, initiatives together. And so, again, to use the sort of build it back example, as we're finding out about different types of infrastructure opportunities that might come to life, thinking about what a very strong regional response to that might be in a way that serves certainly those emergent farmers, certainly things like city food contracts and all of the business opportunities in between. But let me see Matt or Carolyn or any member of the regional food working group if you might like to comment on that as well.
Sure, I'll jump in. Thanks, Kate, and nice to see everyone. Some familiar faces, some new folks. I'm Carolyn Grossman. I'm Director of Regional Planning at New York City Planning. And obviously, this is what we think about all the time: is our regional connections on a variety of issues. So, it starts, I think, as Kate described, with communication, where we found that there was so much mistrust and misunderstanding and missed opportunities in part because what happens in the city and what happens in our region and in wider New York State, as well as New Jersey and Connecticut, just don't often have places to come together and ideate and coordinate, to capture those opportunities. And so one of the things we were forced out of the necessity of the crisis, but really have continued to invest in that capacity, is just trying to make sure we don't end up in that world again, where all of the investments and ideas and improvements that are happening downstate as a result of Food Forward, that we have an opportunity to be ideating with all of you and others, right? So even this meeting happening is in part testament to that, and the fact that Matt has been sitting on some of the Hudson Valley working groups, so that we continue to have these touch points. I think to your the specifics about hubs and aggregation, I think the holy grail, right? Even going back 10 years, there were plans on this that kind of fell by the wayside. That being said, there's an awful lot of work in our region, both in city and upstate, that are happening to try and increase and improve infrastructure. We're certainly mindful of the Grow NYC investments that are happening in Hunts Point right now that we think will make a big difference in terms of bringing local food production in. I think it also relates back to the work that Kate is leading on GFP and trying to think about some of those strategic opportunities, and a lot that also relates to state law and how we think about purchasing rules overall. Some of those conversations we've been able to have because we are now actually routinely in touch with farmers. So I think there's a longer list of things we'd like to do than things that are already getting done, but simply creating that coordination point and sort of being at the ready with opportunities, I think, is what we're trying to capture.
Great. Thanks, Carolyn. Thanks, Kate. The next person I saw is Kristen Kessler. And I forgot to say this at the beginning, but if you wouldn't mind, when you kick off your question, just state your affiliation. Thanks.
Hello. I'm going to try, I'm on a new laptop, and I'm going to try and turn on my camera again. Oh man, I don't know how to switch this around. Okay guys, this is really embarrassing. We're gonna leave my camera off for now. Some of you know me, so you know what my face looks like. But my name is Kristen Kessler. I actually am on day one of a new job right now. So I listed it in there working for the city of Kingston with Emily, and working on a program there. My question, and part of my program will be doing food service guidelines, and so working through different nutrition policies within the communities and at work sites. And so one of my questions was thinking through actually the food procurement guidelines. And so it was interesting, I was at Food Bank for New York City before good food purchasing guidelines were adopted by the city, and we had someone come to us and ask us our thoughts on the different focus areas, and we're like, that's really great, sustainability, blah, 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 workers' rights, we love that. That's gonna be really expensive for us in terms of, we want to be able to feed the most people. And I'm not speaking for Food Bank for New York City right now, by the way, this was just my experience with it. And some of our procurement guidelines were that we had to get a couple of bids, we had to get a couple of quotes, and we had to always choose whichever one was the most affordable. So would love to hear maybe a little bit of your experience in addressing the fact that foods that meet these good food purchasing guidelines are oftentimes more expensive, but procurement guidelines are you have to choose the least expensive food, and kind of maybe how those conversations have gone and how you've addressed that.
Sure. That's a really important question. And I want to sort of take a few steps back. We aren't proposing any particular guidelines for foods within the Good Food Purchasing Program. What we're trying to do is deepen the understanding and knowledge, frankly, about how the purchases that we are making align with those values. So it's an assessment process. And then once we see that, we're able to say, make the decision with a cost benefit analysis of geez, I think we should do better in this, or what would it mean if we did Y? So we don't have a list of like, you must adhere to these specific things, like a specific label or a specific, vicinity that your operation is in. We're really just trying to increase our understanding about where our food's coming from, not just geographically, but what types of food businesses, how are they with labor violations and things along that lens. And then we can, this is what I spoke to, and I think Carolyn spoke to too, working within our existing legal frameworks. How can we absolutely, for so many of our city contracts, have to go with a low cost bid, but you can also put things within the bid itself that are requirements. So it might be a specific type of product, right? It might be a specific way in which something is grown, as an example. Those are all type specific examples that then, based on the low cost bid, then we see who the responsible bidders are. So our first and real, with again a great deal of humility putting out this data, is just to get a sense of where we are right now and where there's room for opportunity. So we aren't looking to say specifically, here are good food purchasing approved items, buy those. It's a little bit of a coming at it from a different perspective.
Yeah. And on that last point that Kate just mentioned, in terms of good food purchasing, also I think has given at least me and our team at City Planning a better understanding of where the opportunities might lie for greater regional sourcing, and how the city's purchasing can open up market opportunities more generally. So, for example, if of the city of New York's food spend $500 million a year, if let's say 10% of that is coming from the region currently, and I'm just making these numbers up. We don't have a great sense for a lot of detailed methodological and challenging reasons about where our food comes from. But I think we could say, for example, there are certain kinds of products that may not be being sourced regionally right now that we could start to work and think about, to that last question. All right, where are the points where we could create more aggregation in food hubs upstate? How could we coordinate so that the food hubs are perhaps being some of the ones who are bidding on these contracts? And then that allows the price point to come down a little bit more, and then allows for a level, or even a more level playing field with some of these larger contracts. So it's a much longer term create demand, coordinating as much as we can, really, while still abiding by the details of the contracts and what they allow. But I think creating this data transparency allows us to better understand where is the food we have, where is it coming from, and how could we source more of that from our own backyard.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Kate. Lou.
Hi, can you hear me? Hi, I'm a retired Port Authority regional transportation planner with 1 foot in Queens and 1 foot in Ulster County. And again, very impressed with the report, learning the ropes as a relatively recent volunteer to regional food issues. One of the things I've heard is that not that many food companies in the food sector in the region really are doing as much as they could to support the kinds of policies that are advocated in the plan. And I'm curious, Kate, since the plan has been released, what kind of reactions have you gotten from companies in the sector, in the city and the region, with regard to sourcing, distribution, post-consumption opportunities where clearly the plan suggests they have a role to play?
Yeah, I really appreciate that question. And we've gotten a lot of sort of just high level praise, but not a lot of, to your point, sort of like specific opportunities for like, okay, let's work together on this. I actually think that the conversations, we did a sort of very 101 of good food purchasing in that regional food working group, and some participants actually did go into the data to do what Matt sort of suggested, of like identifying where is there potential for more within the region. And I suspect that might come, people are still connecting the dots. I think, Todd, you also are thinking along those lines as well. And so we've not gotten a great deal of, Anna, who had to jump from this call, has some thoughts. I see that she's put some of that in the chat as well. But with nothing that's at the sort of shovel ready or putting ink to paper right now stage, but I really do appreciate the question. And I suspect, again, once we get some sort of firmer clarity around funding, that might attract people to a conversation that might get a little bit more of a rapid simmer.
Thanks, Kate. Do other folks have questions or comments? Todd?
Hey guys, just give me a thumbs up, Sarah, if my audio is okay. Great, thanks. In classic fashion, I'm working from my four-wheel office, but am stationary, so I can talk a little bit. I just wanted to say thank you to everyone on the phone who participated in this, or on the Zoom who participated in this, but also the leadership to start pulling this together. We've seen other parts of the country start to tackle this, but truly for New York City to take this on with Kate and the planning department's leadership and the administration, I think is benchmark for those of us working in this area for the last 15, 20 years. So just a big thank you and recognition in that respect. But also just want to throw out there, Kate, you and I have had some conversations. Some of your team and I have had conversations. I was part of a bunch of the different sessions that got us to this point. How do we keep a balance between the city, New York State, and federal priorities, funding sources? New York City needs to take care of their own. New York State wants to take care of its own. But as the exercises and much of your presentation illustrate, New York City is a boundaryless when it comes to state and parochial boundaries system. Not only the economy, not only the sourcing and the waste streams and kind of the holistic component of that, but how do we keep that dialogue going so that there is reciprocity, state, city, federal, neighboring states, neighboring regions? Any thoughts on that?
Sure. I really appreciate the question. I'll offer something, and then Carolyn or Matt, certainly feel free as well. It sort of speaks to, again, I think Sarah's question about why now? Why did we do this plan now? Which was to capitalize on energy and momentum. And it is incumbent upon all of us, especially those in government at the levels that you described, to keep those lanes and lines of communication open and plowed. So, we've turned a new page on many things. And I, with this regional working group, I think that is just the tip of the iceberg for things that we can continue to work on collectively. And then, of course, it must be said, in another few weeks, we're going to have a new administration here in the city, and that will be important, again, to sort of set the tone for how food and food systems continue to get expressed and prioritized. So, Carolyn, I'm going to see how you want to respond.
Yeah, I'll just add. Thanks for the question. Thanks for the support, Todd. I mean, obviously, we've had a number of conversations in the past, and we wouldn't be where we were without your, without your support and many of the others here. I would say whether it's food, whether it's housing, whether it's, infrastructure, the basic idea that New York City is sort of, downstate and something to be forgotten about, or vice versa, is something we've encountered a lot. And I think just showing up and having conversations like this over and over start to break down those boundaries of just like, understanding that we're actually all planning for the same thing, and that, a systems approach actually can benefit everyone. That's sort of the first level. And I like to think that we are doing a good job of trying to break those boundaries down. The second part is when funding becomes available or when there are opportunities, how do we find ways to leverage all of our interests together? And I think that's, I think especially as we start to look at potential federal sources and such, really trying to get specific and think about projects and investments that might embody this systemic approach, which is to say that have elements that directly benefit multiple parts of the system, so that collectively an investment is really benefiting the entire region, but individually we all also feel like we're seeing sort of that direct impact in our backyards. And I think that's the hard part, but I don't think it's an impossible part. So I think that's like right at the step where we're at. Again, with the transition to our new mayor, who we believe will see these issues just as we see them here. I think, and again, knock on wood, with the idea that there may be funding sources, heretofore unavailable, those are precisely the questions we're thinking about at this point.
Great, thanks for that. June.
Hi, thank you, Kate and your team. This is really exciting work, and I have a ton of questions. I guess we're getting close to the end of the hour, but my question was about the change of administrations and what that means for your agency, and how we can support and how we could send messaging of support through where to who. What do you need to help this work carry over into the next administration that we can
Thank you. Thank you, June, for that question. I think everybody has seen there's a very large transition committee. So certainly reaching out to those members and the other leadership is always helpful. We remain optimistic. I mean, we've had some initial conversations. We've been very transparent with, I think transparency is the name of our game here. We've been transparent with our desires for Food Forward, with, where we see the future going. Personally, I am a dietitian. I have a long health and nutrition background, and couldn't be more excited with the ideas and visions to center health more in our food system. I don't know, Carolyn, again, Matt, if there's anything that you would like to add to that.
No, I love the idea of this group being, helpful in continuing to sort of prioritize regionalism and regional connections as part of the policy going forward. It hadn't occurred to me, so I don't have a specific idea, but I would actually say it's true in all fashions. I don't think it's just about, sort of targeting the mayor who we believe, will likely see eye to eye. I think it's really thinking about all of the opportunities that we might have to leverage each other to be more effective. So as we're looking at, the state legislature next year, as we're looking at federal opportunities, as you're looking at grant opportunities yourselves, if you see win-wins there, I think we, Kate and Matt and I all have an open door. I think we're really looking to find places to knit together disparate ideas. And, they're coming out of, I think, the most interesting, sort of different opportunities of, once we've now opened these doors, finding synergies is actually, it's a very exciting opportunity. So I would just say, anything and everything. I think right now we're really, within the confines of what Kate has sort of described, there's a lot on the table that we could do. So identifying those specific opportunities, we welcome people bringing them to us.
Thanks, Karen. Good question, June. I think we have just a couple more minutes. We were scheduled for an hour and 15 minutes in case we needed it. Are there any final questions or comments? We've got Sarah Salem, co-facilitator here, one of the founders of this Hudson Valley Food Systems Coalition, has a comment in here thanking you all. All right, so with that, I think we're gonna wrap up. And again, I wanted to thank Kate and Matt and Carolyn for being with us today. I also wanna thank my colleague, Megan Cahill, for helping to organize this event today. And also a particular shout out to Matt, who's on our food processing working group for the coalition and actually suggested that we have this gathering today. So thank you all very much, and best of luck in your year-end wrap-up and transition to next year. Really, really wonderful work. Thank you for sharing it with us today.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all. Take care.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.